Josh and Frankie. What a couple of dumb shits. Hello, Primates! You found Primus Tracks. Congratulations! There are other places to find us, such as at Primus Tracks on Instagram and Twitter. Email is primustrackspod@gmail.com, and there is a Facebook page, appropriately titled Primus Tracks. I am a piglet in the sty. I am Josh. He is the tall hog at the trough. It's Frankie.
Cool.
I've put you at the top of the socioeconomic hierarchy, and your reaction is cool. Well, we are talking about the Grand Pecking Order. Not just the record today, Frankie, but the track. The Grand Pecking Order, track number 12 on your Oysterhead release from the year 2001. We will get into that momentarily. But first, I have one piece of miscellaneous debris, Frankie. Last time, Frankie, during one of our Primates takes about pseudo-suicide, somebody mentioned that it had, at least that first portion of the track, had a bit of a Red Hot Chili Peppers vibe. And
yes.
That, I suppose Les had, at one or two shows, mentioned that as well. And our good pal, Charlene, up there in the wilds of Ontario, chimed in and suggested that we check out the RHCP track Warped, which is from their album One Hot Minute. Now, once again, not a Chili Peppers guy. I'm sure there's a lot of crossover between those two bands as far as fandoms, Frankie, but I am not one of them.
No,
and when
I
I
don't
was,
like them.
You are not either. Okay.
No.
And it was great because when I was in college, I had a teammate who is possibly the biggest Peppers fan you would meet, and I was definitely up there as far as Primus fandom went, and we would kind of go back and forth about the merits of our respective bands, and I don't think, I definitely never got into the Peppers, and he certainly never risked it with Primus, so I believe we're still on the opposite sides of the fence there. But why not? One Hot Minute. Now, even though we don't know the band, one thing I think I recall, Frankie, and hopefully you can help me with this, is One Hot Minute was not necessarily a reviled Chili Peppers album, but I believe it had a very lukewarm welcoming from the fan base. Is that correct? Do you remember that as well?
I wouldn't recall any of that.
Maybe it was just slightly underwhelming. I remember it being received coolly by the diehards. Anyhow, let's listen to a few seconds of Warped and see if we hear pseudo-suicide vibes. Sounds pretty slick.
There's that same sense of urgency that pseudo-suicide has during the intro, right?
I think that's what Charlene is pointing us to. So I think I feel that same urgency that you described in the two tunes. I don't know that musically they are so closely connected, although they do feel similar, I suppose, in those moments. That's the first time I've heard a Chili Peppers song that wasn't something off of Californication over the radio or somebody's playlist or something over which I had no power in quite some time. Wow. All right. Thank you, by the way, Charlene. I appreciate that very much. Remember, if you have miscellaneous debris, primustrackspod@gmail.com or at the aforementioned socials on Instagram and Threads at Primus Tracks. Hit us up. Let us know what we missed. Or if we threw out a question and you've got an answer, we're all about it. Today's track is the Grand Pecking Order, the title track for the lone studio release from Oysterhead. It clocks in at an efficient 2 minutes and 35 seconds. Your credits, Frankie: music, Anastasio and Claypool; lyrics, unmistakably Claypool. What do you have on
Absolutely.
what do you have on this one?
It was not part of the New Orleans package, so it was worked on and created much later. Well, a bit later. And it wasn't performed at every single stop of the 2001 tour. Actually, there are very few performances of this song. So it was performed on a handful of dates from the original run to promote the album. It was not performed at Bonnaroo, and it was performed at the last four dates so far of the Oysterhead reunion. So it's curious how, while it is the title track of the record, it's not one that gets performed consistently live.
So this one not as common as the others. Any insights into that? Maybe it's the nature of the music. Have you picked up anything?
What I have noticed from the live performances that I've heard is that it doesn't deviate much from the studio track. I mean, it is longer than the studio version every time it's played live, but it's not something that gets jammed out into 10 or 15 plus minutes. I mean,
Yeah.
they stick, fairly closely to what is on the record. So I'm guessing that might not be very exciting for them in a live setting.
It's certainly different than most of the other tracks, just about every track on the record. But for us Primus fans, we're used to this kind of track appearing out of nowhere on a Primus record and confounding the casual listener and delighting the freakazoids like us because it's a veering off into unexpected territory. So I do recall when I first heard this track, I thought, oh, this is a lost Primus song to a degree, and it certainly has that vibe to me of a Southington waltz. Not necessarily a space farm, but it certainly has that old timey jig quality to it that Les will drop in there from time to time.
Do you get the same impression as I do that when Les sings the refrain of the song, he's channeling Tom Waits with his vocals?
Oh gosh, yes. That is one of the influences on display here, in my opinion. Yeah, this is an interesting track in its presentation and its execution. It's funny because in these kind of tracks, you listen to the instrumentation and you go, okay, well, there's that. It's kind of simple and sing-songy. The drummer's playing with some toys and kind of keeping it simple. The bass kind of plods along, and there's no theatrics on display. There's a pretty cool little guitar lick in there, and a funny solo, and you could oversimplify it or reduce it to that as far as the music goes, and be on your way. The lyrical content is quite interesting to me, but there is a portion of the track, the studio track, I'd like to play, Frankie, because to me it has all of the coolest elements on display of the track in about 25 seconds. For those of you who'd like to follow along on your own Grand Pecking Order track, this is 1 minute and 6 seconds to about 1.5 minutes.
Or a piglet in the sty on the grand ladder of life. Are you near the highest rung? Or somewhere near the bottom with your nose in hairy bung? And you're sitting with a smile on your face. For to pout about would only bring disgrace. To the grand pecking order, the grand pecking order, the grand pecking order, the grand pecking order, to the grand pecking order, the grand pecking order, the grand pecking order, the grand pecking order.
The vocal delivery, the two modes of vocal delivery. It sounds like a march. Are you the tall hog at the trough or the piglet in the sty? You can get really up in your nose for that one. It's a lot of fun. And then the chorus, as you intimated, he gets more gravelly. Or pre-chorus, I guess you could call it. For to pout about would only bring disgrace. He's down there. There's a couple of vocal layers there, and he's getting down gravelly, and so there's contrast there. There's a fair amount of reverb on the vocals, too, when you're listening on some cans. And I like that, too. It sounds like a proclamation is taking place here. So love the vocalizations. The envelope filter, this is one of the only times you're ever going to hear me say this, Frankie Beristain. The envelope filter works here.
And
Love it.
the guitar is great.
And then that guitar,
It's so
like,
unusual.
yes. And I think it's the guitar in conjunction with the percussion, as well as the lyrical content, I guess all of it, does take on the quality of a quasi-medieval dance or jig. And the guitar really sells it there with that strumming during the pre-chorus. And then I couldn't tell you what mode or scale Trey is playing during the chorus, but it is so medieval and jaunty. And so it just feels like we're back in the 14th century, because I was there and I could tell you all about it. But it certainly has that feel of something from hundreds of years ago. What jumps out at you when you listen to this tune?
The cadence, the beat is so unusual. The drumming is almost tribal, right? The guitar, I don't know what effect it's got that it sounds so unique. As you said, the vocals, that switch that Les does between the verse and the refrain, it's so dramatic, right?
Very much
So
so.
it's very theatrical.
Yeah. It's almost like Trey is playing a lute or something because it's so trebly and kind of boxed in to a certain frequency band, not as wide as it normally would be, and as we hear it on other tracks of the record. So to me, he's kind of channeling that medieval lute sound to a degree. Yeah, those drums. You could imagine almost some kind of court jester or somebody dancing around with their tambourine, banging on the skin and shaking the teeny little cymbals, and pretend that's Stu doing that back there. Why not? It just has that jaunty quality to it. And I love to use the word jaunty, by the way. So this track came at the right time. There's so much jauntiness to it. I paused it right as the guitar solo enters, and the guitar solo is fine. Trey's making some goofy noises, and there's some feedback and some effects going on, and it's fine. But to me, it's the vocals really, really push this tune. And so you get to go from in the grand pecking order, and you sniff it with a smile on your face, down there, getting into gravelly Tom Waits territory. But it also emphasizes the lyrics there. Every time he gets into that gravelly voice, it's about people doing the little dance or sniffing the hairy bung with a smile on their face, because to do the opposite would be to besmirch this system of the grand pecking order. So, and of course, that's a no-no. You will be punished one way or another, especially... Guess what, Frankie? If you're at the bottom of the ladder, or the piglet in the sty, or at the table by the bathroom, there's a lot of great imagery in here to account for this concept or discuss this concept of the hierarchical ladder on which we place ourselves or are placed by external forces in our economic social system or what have you. Going back to that quasi-medieval jig imagery, Frankie, there's two reasons why I go there. One, I think I just took off from Tim Slowinski's excellent artwork on the Oysterhead release and all over the Oysterhead website. I envision those, those giant marionettes. They're very popular in Europe. Those giant marionettes that end up in parades. And so they have those really wide-eyed, expressionless faces, almost terrifyingly so. Those things have always freaked me out, Frankie. And when I see them on display or see them in parades, I have to look away. They're freaky. That is the image I have, is that those marionettes are acting out, or those giant puppets or whatever you want to call them, they're acting out the lyrics of the tune. So if I were to shoot a music video, one, it'd be nightmare fuel for me and probably a lot of people. But it would have that, I think it would have that feel to it. The second reason I go there, Frankie, is right around the time, just a few months, I should say, before this record was released in 2001, I had been studying Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, which was written near the end of the 14th century, and it's Chaucer's obviously most well-known work, but the whole conceit behind that is there's a group of people traveling from London to a cathedral in Canterbury, And to pass the time, they start a storytelling contest. And Chaucer is writing all of this. So he writes prologues for all the characters as they introduce their stories or reveal things about their own lives. And then he writes the stories that they tell. And if I recall correctly, I think the winner got dinner at a tavern in Canterbury or something of that nature. So it's Chaucer telling a whole bunch of stories told by a whole bunch of different people. I had the privilege, Frankie, of reading that fucker in Middle English, which is so confusing because I was taking Spanish classes at the time as well. I would argue that reading Middle English was harder than reading Espanol because it looked like English and I was reading it like English, and that was wrong because the vowel sounds were all different 500, 600 years ago. It was very challenging to read those stories in Middle English. But what's the one thing, no matter what century you're in, Frankie, the one thing humans have in common? They love potty humor. Farts are funny in 2024 and 1024. 1024 BC, I'm sure, in the cradle of civilization, those guys were all farting on each other and laughing their asses off while they built beautiful aqueducts and engineered architectural marvels. One particular tale from the Canterbury Tales came to mind, Frankie, and that is the Miller's Tale. Are you at all familiar with the Canterbury Tales?
I'm aware with the title, but I've never delved into the actual book or the stories.
It is quite a revealing window into the time period, the late 14th century in England. Some of these stories are very funny. Some of them are kind of classic love tragic tales. Some are really funny. Some are mean-spirited. Some are just weird, especially to us because some of the ideas are fairly foreign 600 years in the future. The Miller's Tale, though, is one of the first ones in the book, and it's quite memorable because it is fairly funny. And I'm going to try to briefly summarize it for you. There is a carpenter and his dainty bride, and I'm not making this up.
Really?
Yes. It centers on a carpenter who marries a younger woman who is one of the most beautiful women in the village. There are many other men who fancy her, but she's a faithful wife. However, they rent out a room to a young man who has designs upon her, and there's also a local pastor who fancies her as well. So there's these two young guys who fancy the carpenter's wife. Nicholas is renting the room. Allison is the wife. Absalom is the pastor. From what I recall, they're both trying to steal a kiss from her. Absalom knocks at the window, her bedroom window one night. I think he actually knocks on the flap or vent, the privy, the little flap you would open to relieve yourself through the wall outside. So anyhow, Absalom knocks on that. She doesn't really want much to do with him, and he says, "Give me a kiss. I just want to kiss you." And she says, "Okay." She says, "Close your eyes." So he puckers up to kiss her, closes his eyes, and he realizes she has put her bare bottom out of that opening, and he's... And in the verse, it says, "Absalom hath kissed her nether eye." I've always loved that line. He kisses her bottom, or worse, and he goes to the blacksmith's shop and gets a piece of metal. I think it's a tool, part of a plow or something. And he heats it up, and he goes back and knocks again and says, "Come on out, I want another kiss." And the other guy, Nicholas, he is awake at that time, and he was relieving himself, and he thinks and I think Allison told him or something, and he thinks it's funny. He goes and sticks his butt out of the opening and releases a giant fart upon Absalom, who retaliates by poking him in the rear with his very hot piece of metal. And so Nicholas has a burnt ass. Absalom's mouth is unspeakably filthy. And there's some other stuff around the carpenter because people think he's insane. It is a bizarre story, but it's very funny. And that all comes from the lyric, "Your nose and hairy bung." That's the association I made in the moment when this record first came out and I heard these lyrics.
Personally, what the song reminds me of are the Matryoshkas. Have you ever seen them?
The nesting dolls?
Yes, the Russian nesting dolls.
Yeah, those are really cool.
That's what the song looks like for me in my mind.
Oh, do tell. I would love to get more information or more detail on that.
Oh, just because of the way that they are arranged, right? The from the biggest one to the tiniest one. It's
Yeah.
amazing how detailed they can be, even if they are so small. But just the idea that all of them are contained by the biggest one. I think it works for this track, right?
I could imagine those Matryoshka dolls doing something. Yeah.
I mean, it's also curious how this is the title track of the record, but the record also has a song about the name of the band. So you can
Ah,
pick whichever you choose to represent the album, right?
right. Uh, Mr. Oysterhead, the Grand Pecking Order. You're going to see those in the on the album cover as well as on the track list. That's a good point. And it is interesting that they went with this track to also name the record because it does have it's a loaded phrase. Pecking order is a pretty standard and well-known idea or concept in the English language, but to call it the grand pecking order makes it feel like we're part of something huge, as opposed to if they had called this record Shadow of a Man, that would have given it a much starker, desperate quality, I think.
Yeah.
But this one just feels like a huge and big idea, and it kind of is with these three guys coming together. So I think it does fit. That's a great point. In this track, lyrically, Frankie, we have four metaphors for the grand pecking order. It's a pretty standard rhyme scheme. We have A, B, C, B, and so on. So the second and fourth lines rhyme with one another of each stanza. So the first one, in the grand pecking order, where is it you stand, under foot of swollen bastards or on the neck of another man? I love the flow of or on the neck of another man, by the way. That's a great line. In this pecking order, we are all stacked up. You're either under foot of some rich SOB. The swollen bastard tells me it's just some fat cat, rich dude. Or you're on the neck of another man. So you're either being stepped on or stepping on someone or both.
Nothing, and there's no middle ground.
Next metaphor is at the grand eating table. Are you sitting near the head or in the corner by the bathroom where you're asked to pass the bread? Bread, of course, is a staple food. Those people aren't going to be eating steak. And this is one of those things I hadn't heard in a long time is being seated near the bathroom in the restaurant. That's often the worst table. That's not something I'd thought of in a while. Or are you at the head of the table where obviously the most important people are, and I'm using important with air quotes, and who are going to eat the fanciest food? He's asking the same question using different imagery. The third one, in the grand pecking order, where is it you lie? Are you the tall hog at the trough, Frankie, or a piglet in the sty, me? So that one pretty much explains itself. And finally, on the grand ladder of life, which is a pretty common metaphor, the rungs of the ladder for society, are you near the highest rung or somewhere near the bottom with your nose in hairy bung? And Les did a really nice job fitting that line in with your nose in hairy bung. He really gives you something to think about there. Because there's somebody ahead of you on the ladder and your nose is right up there, you know what. Much like poor Absalom in The Miller's Tale. You sniff the bung with the smile on your face. You dance around with a smile on your face. You pass the bread with a smile on your face. How dare you do pass it with a smile on your face because you can't besmirch this system that works for me, the guy at the head of the table. And it's all. And so there's a kind of a grand metaphor here, and we could go down the road of he's speaking for the oppressed, or he's speaking out against the capitalist system, I suppose, of our time, or if it's, or because of the medieval feel of the tune, he could be speaking out against feudalism, although he's a few hundred years too late to really make an impact there. But and there really isn't much of a ladder in feudalism. So I would imagine this is more a critique of our modern systems and how they work and how they disenfranchise people or otherwise push people out or to the bottom. But the metaphors I think hold, and he's just throwing this out here. Where are you? Your thoughts?
I agree with you completely. I mean, the imagery conveys quite clearly what the song is about, right? Like we mentioned, no middle ground. the rich getting richer, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the what is also curious is that the track makes me hark back to that comment Les made when he was hanging backstage with Oysterhead, and he said that he wanted to make songs for the people, right? He said he wanted to make songs for the average guy walking down the street, and then we know who he pointed to at the time.
Kern.
Yes. So the track makes me think that it's less sort of speaking for the working class, right? People who have to actually tolerate many of these situations in order to make a living, right?
Right, living a life full of indignities just to survive, and we know he comes from a blue collar background and is quite adamant about the plight of the working class throughout many of his lyrics.
The
And I think,
carpenters, the truckers, all
yeah,
of those people are represented in his
right,
lyrics.
right, and I think that he's speaking to the bigger picture of the grand pecking order from that perspective, taking the 30,000-foot view of it. It's pretty clear who he's siding with. He could have written a song called "Eat the Rich." There's a few of those out there, Let's lynch the landlord, those kind of things. He's taking a gentler approach, but he's still planting a similar idea in our heads. Those guys at the head of the table, those guys at the top of the ladder, those guys stepping on other people, they're the problem. And that's just a product of the system, of course, right? The rich get richer, as you said. The people who benefit will never criticize the system, Frankie. It's working for them.
And he could have delivered the lyrics in such a way that the track could have come across in a very serious manner, right? The very nature of the instrumentation, which is so odd, it's such a strange time signature. It made Les have to fit the lyrics into that cadence, into that groove. And as a result, everything sounds like it could fall apart at any moment, right? But it somehow is held together throughout the duration of the track, and it gives it this different quality. So it's not, I mean, even though the topic is quite serious, the song comes across as almost playful, right?
Yes. Almost lighthearted in its
Exactly.
presentation.
It's got this quality to it that it's serious, but it doesn't take itself that way at the same time.
Clearly, that was the goal to a degree, and I think they accomplished that here. And that's what makes it an interesting track. It's not just a straight-ahead rocker or anything like that. It's a different thing going on here. Well, let's hear what the Primates have to say, Frankie. If you would like your opinion on the track up for discussion read on this here podcast, all you have to do is go to patreon.com/Primus Tracks. From all of the wonderful tiers of support the universal constant is, Primates Takes. You submit your thoughts on the track and I'll read them right here. First up is Brooks Delight. Frankie, who says, a weird and wonderful ride. Claypool is certainly channeling his inner resident on this track. That's something we didn't discuss yet. There is some residential stuff going on under the surface as well. Les, of course, Brooks continues, has covered the Residents on a number of occasions. If the Residents ever return the favor, this would be my pick for the track. Both the music and lyrics would fit seamlessly into one of their albums or live shows. I wonder if Stu and Trey are Residents fans, or if they just let the Colonel steer the ship on this one. Oh, Brooks brings up a fascinating question. If you were going to have the Residents cover a Claypool song, which one would it be? Ooh, this would be a contender. I agree with Brooks. Frankie, what is your knee-jerk reaction to that question? What's your knee-jerk answer to the Residents are covering a Claypool song? Which one is it going to be?
That's actually a pretty tough one. I would love to hear what the Residents would do if it was a race car driver.
Oh, okay. So you're taking it more in a direction of a tune that is not at all associated with the Residents.
Yeah.
I guess going by Brooks' reasoning that it is residential, I would love to hear the Residents cover Calling Kyle. Our good pal, Sculligan Val, Frankie says, Being That Wield the Spade is about a famous speech by...
Nicolae Ceausescu.
I think this also echoes some famous words by him as well. In the trial before his execution, the transcript shows...
Nicolae Ceausescu.
Frequently refusing to answer questions unless they could hold the trial before the Grand National Assembly. It was the singular branch of government in Romania at the time, of course under the leadership of...
Nicolae Ceausescu.
I can't hear Grand National Assembly without also thinking of the Grand Pecking Order and vice versa. So I have Chaucer and Sculligan Val has...
Nicolae Ceausescu.
On trial. Wow. Eric in Australia says, Grand Pecking Order is a joyously quirky track, freighted with the truth of the world, a Claypool special. Succinctly put. Eric, you know what? I've noticed that Eric kind of encapsulates what we're saying. So he gives us the 5-second version of these episodes. Primus Tracks for the Man in a Hurry by Eric in Australia.
That's great.
Edwin Allen Richards IV says, Grand Pecking Order was a song I didn't like at first. It felt like a filler track and was one I would frequently skip. I'm almost glad I did, though, because it now feels like I was saving it for later. When I revisit this album, I enjoy it more and more each time I hear this track.
It's a grower. It's a grower for sure.
That's certainly not a shower, but it does grow on you for certain. And there are tracks like that all throughout, littered throughout my music collection that I didn't like at first blush and eventually came around to. And it took some time. And finally, Anthony Del Prete says, The Grand Pecking Order is awesome for so many reasons. It's the shortest on the record, but it's still the title track. It's quite a visual piece of music with all parts truly making you feel like you were at the grand dinner among the snooty nobles. Trey's guitar is perfect with his runs during the And You're Dancing with a Smile on Your Face part. That's the lute part that I was referencing, Frankie. As well as the other sweet and scratchy riff that sounds like British royalty to me. I also like the bomp bomp after each phrase. Those are great takes from our primates. Thank you guys so much for your
Thanks, guys.
input. All right, Frankie, how about some live tracks?
Let's check them out.
We are going back to Scranton, July 3, 2021, for the Grand Pecking Order. Wow. It sounds like it would be on Of Fungi and Foe right now. Now I just hear bomp bomp. Thanks, Anthony.
You're totally right. It's got a fungi quality to it.
The studio cut from the Oysterhead record doesn't give me that same feeling, so that's a contrast that interests me. Let's move forward a couple of minutes and hear what they got cooking.
And you're dancing with a smile on your face. For to pat it out would only bring disgrace to the Grand Pecking Order. The Grand Pecking Order. The Grand Pecking Order. The Grand Pecking Order. To the Grand Pecking Order. The Grand Pecking Order.
So it is so much more stop-start in that live rendition than it is on the record, and it makes me laugh. I don't know why. Those pauses, I can't imagine, especially the Fish audience at those shows, in 2001. I know this is 2021, but that Fish audience in 2001 had to have been cocking their heads and wondering what they were hearing.
Most likely.
It is so Claypool. And it's so goofy. I love it. Much like our return visit to Scranton, we are now headed down to Hotlanta, May 1, 2022. Which festival was this, Frankie?
Sweetwater.
Sweet Chiba. There's some envelope for you. Okay, I see why this is a 6-minute track, Frankie. They're just messing with us.
Yes.
The tune eventually starts, and we're going to forward about halfway through and see what's going on down here in Sweetwater.
Pecking order to the grand pecking order to the grand pecking order. The grand pecking order to the grand pecking order. The grand pecking order.
He's got a little chorus on his mic there, Les does. Interesting.
Yeah.
I like that vocal. I prefer that one to what we heard in Scranton.
Play a little more. I think a cool instrumental part is coming up.
Oh, yeah. There's that vocal pattern again. It's very swampy. Speaking of vocals, let's hear them late in the track here.
And you sniff it with a smile on your face. For to stand about would only bring disgrace to the grand.
Did he say disgrace?
Yes. What is that?
I think he meant to say disgrace and drop the R.
That thing Les did with the vocals, I think it's him channeling the swollen bastard contemplating his wealth, right?
Without question. The maniacal laughter on the Sandman
Yeah.
mic is the swollen bastard laugh now. And that's what we should call it from here on in. When you guys are going to your, and we didn't even talk about this, holy cow, Primus kind of announced a tour. Oops, didn't really cover that in miscellaneous debris. But when you guys are going to see Primus this summer, and Les is laughing crazily or laughing uncontrollably through the Sandman mic, that is now the swollen bastard laugh, and make sure you let him know that. Or, turn to the friend who's it's their first Primus show and say, oh, that's the swollen bastard laugh. He does that all the time. Nice ones, Frankie. Thank you so much.
I'm glad you enjoyed them.
So I guess I should say this. Get your hairy bung out of my face. Grand pecking order. You've been tracked. Next time, Frankie, is it a Bowie song next time? It sounds familiar.
It sounds certainly inspired by an iconic Bowie track.
And I'm sure you will be able to tell us all about it as we wrap up our coverage of Oysterhead's The Grand Pecking Order.
As a final thought, Josh, which came to me as we were listening to the live tracks, I just want to run this by you. We said there's no middle ground in the track, right?
And as we know, the middle class is slowly eroding away in the United States, Frankie.
Exactly.
So, I'm kidding. What? Yeah, there's no middle ground.
Well, it made me think that Les could also be hinting at how you could become fairly successful if you work hard, which are the ideals promised a decade before in American life, right?
Huh.
But to reach that point where you're actually the billionaire or you're at the top of the grand pecking order,
Hmm.
that does require to abandon any sense of what we refer to as a middle ground, right? In order to become a billionaire, you do have to step on people and you do
Yep.
have to take advantage of others, right?
And you're going to
So
compromise any moral integrity that you might have had, most
exactly. So
likely.
I guess that is the 1% Les is singing about in the grand pecking order. What do you think?
Oh yeah, the ladder's an illusion. The current billionaires don't want anybody else in the club. Edgy stuff here at the end. Oh my. Before we go, Frankie, we do need to thank our pals at the Patreon. You guys, thank you so much for your support. It's
Thank
the
you so much, guys.
greatest thing in the world to do the monthly hangouts with you, to do the bonus podcasts with you, to post the Primates takes, to post some of our goofy pieces of memorabilia and talk about that stuff, and to know which live shows you guys are going to.
And you do not want to miss our next hangout. We're not giving anything away in terms of what's coming, but I'm just going to tell you that there's going to be something truly special for the next one.
Lure. I don't know. I'm making that up. Let's thank our Primatrons by name. Edwin Allen Richards IV, Matt
Thanks.
Ray. Oh, yeah. And I get to say this every month. Deluge Nuts. Thanks, buddy. Jordan Kahn, resident fish expert. Matt Crakely. Trish. Thank you, Trish.
Thank you, Trish, for
Bo
the
Campbell.
amazing decoration.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Bo Campbell, thank you so much for your generous support. Stephen McDonald. Eric in Australia. John Gatwood. Tamby Meatfoot, which is still one of my favorite names. Brooks Delight. Ryan Rashawn. Thank you, sir. Joseph Pebbler. Christian Rogers. Thank you, pal. Nick in the Netherlands, Frankie.
Nick, Hal,
See you in Europe this summer, Nick. Possibly. Travis in Alaska, #1. Stephanie Wolfgang King. Carl Reinsch. Had a great talk with Carl about the Spent Poets. Holy cow. Travis in Alaska, #2. Is he #2? I don't know who's #1 and #2 as far as Travis. So a Travis in Alaska and another Travis in Alaska. Thanks to Sarah Markham as well, and our pal Jesse Calton in the Bay Area. Thanks to Porter, Anthony Del Preet, go Bills, John Shreve, David Fraser Crane, Johnny Perona, who once again made that beautiful song that you guys hear during Primates Takes.
fabulous.
Mr. Funknificent, thank you so much for your support. Juhani Coho, Stephen Stang, Chris, thank you so much. Simon in Australia. It's great that I get to say in Australia for our Australian primates. I could say, like, Chris in America. It just doesn't have the same ring to it, does it? Mike Tuckerman in Canada. Thank you, Mike, for your support. Skulgan Val, Chris Gentile, Keith Thompson, Kevin, Amber Porter, and El Patron Numero Uno, Carlos Arizmendi. You bet. Thank you all so much for your support. Looking forward to hanging out with you guys through the Patreon and at some of the live shows this summer. Thank you all so much, primates, listeners, wonderful people that you are. Later days.
With the maze.
Pecking on to the ground, pecking on the ground.